This is the BioCentury Show.
The BioCentury Show is supported by the BioCentury Conference Series. Join BioCentury on the road to network, partner, and debate with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal-making and investment. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information.
Welcome to a very special edition of the BioCentury Show. I'm Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief at BioCentury, and of all the guests I've had, my biggest pleasure is to have my co-host on this show as a guest, Steve Usdin. Guest is probably a little bit of a stretch in that word, Steve, but this is an important time. It is the beginning, the dawn of a new administration. We're starting a new year. I've just come out of JP Morgan, and really so many people have so many questions about where we are right now, what this administration means. And obviously that comes against the backdrop of where the biopharma ecosystem is financially and in terms of investments. So I want to start with one of your biggest specialties and the question on everybody's lips, which is about FDA and HHS. I think normally in this country and across the world, people couldn't even begin to tell you who the HHS secretary is. But the name recognition of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., is huge, and contacts abroad certainly know who he is and what his opinions are. So break down for us, Steve, how people should be thinking about his nomination and what might cascade from that at specifically FDA.
Well, so I think right now it's probably a toss-up as to whether he'll be confirmed or not. So I'd start with that. And it's interesting, if he isn't confirmed, the constituency that will have done him in will be the pro-life constituency, because former Vice President Pence is leading a very aggressive campaign to try to derail the nomination because of comments that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made in the past supporting abortion. If he's confirmed, well, I've written before, I think it's going to be an unmitigated disaster, and I'll stick with that. You know, there are people who are supporting his nomination, who are trying to downplay the comments that he's made in the past on vaccines, and they're trying to say that he's not really going to focus on vaccines very much at HHS. But I think that, look, he's going to have the bully pulpit. He's going to make statements, and he's going to cause his administration to do things that will be disastrous for public health. I think there's also a question of how the people who are going to work for him, if he's confirmed, will try to advance the agenda that he's espoused. So, you know, you asked about FDA. I think that's probably exemplifies a lot of things about the incoming administration, or now the current administration. Enormous opportunities, enormous threats, right? So there are opportunities at FDA to better align regulation with scientific advances, to streamline bureaucracy, to improve the ways it receives external advice and communicates with the public and regulated industry. FDA has taken baby steps on some things that could be transformational, right? Platform approvals, global reviews that are now limited to oncology, collaboration on global reviews, could be expanded to all of FDA, replacing regulatory flexibility with a science-based approach, particularly for ultra-rare diseases. There are all these ideas that really could be transformational, but the threats are huge too. So first is the question of whether the new commissioner, which is presumably going to be Marty Makary, has the interest and the ability to protect FDA staff from the depredations of the DOJ and the OMB. Will FDA staff continue to be able to work on a hybrid basis? That's something that they've been doing for 20 years. It's not a COVID kind of thing. If they can't, if they're really forced in a heavy-handed way for everybody to come back into the office, I've heard that as much as 20% of staff will quit. And there's a good bet that that's going to be some of the best people, because those are the people who can most readily find jobs elsewhere.
Steve, I want
Yeah,
to ask you, I want to follow up on something and come back to the staffing question in a minute. And one thing that I perhaps should have emphasized more in our introduction, you as Washington editor have covered this for, can I say 20 years? Is that kind? Maybe a little bit
30,
longer?
30.
30. Okay, let's call it like it is. 30 years, okay? You have seen many administrations come and go, several FDA commissioners come and go. My understanding from you and others is that Marty Makary is qualified and likely to get nominated, regardless of
Likely to be
where we.
confirmed. Yeah.
Sorry, to get confirmed, regardless of where we are on RFK Jr. So the Trump administration, because of the nature of the Trump administration, has a lot more sort of kerfuffle around it. And a question I have for you is regarding the FDA and the prospects for change. Is it really different? Is it that different than any other incoming new administration and new commissioner? Is this something you think every time, or is there a different slate of issues here? You know, even beyond the whether people work from home. How do you look at this?
No. It's very different. We're at an inflection point, clearly, for several reasons. Okay, one of the reasons is because we've got two center director openings. Patricia Cavazzoni, her last day of work was the last day of the Biden administration. I don't think that's coincidental. And and Jeff Shuren is left as the head of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. There's a third medical product center, CBER, the Center for Biologics. Peter Marks has said that he intends to hang on there as long as he can. We don't know how that's going to work out. But in any case, there are two of those big openings. The center directors are really the people, the medical product center directors really run the FDA on a day-to-day basis. They have far more control over the decisions and the policies it makes really than the commissioner. So that's one reason why it makes an enormous difference. Another one is that there are things that are planned, that are proposed, that are going to go across the federal workforce that could have tremendous effects on FDA. I mentioned the back to work. There's also elimination of DEI policies, and there's a general antagonism, right, toward the civil service and an effort to make civil servants to strip them of their protections and to make them more beholden to the White House and to the president. All of those things could change the FDA in dramatic ways. And as I said, there's also on the positive side, there's really a sense that we're at an inflection point in terms of trying to catch the regulatory system up with the science, and there are possibilities for doing that. I've reported about a commission that President Trump plans to create of outside people to make recommendations for changes at FDA. It's something a little bit like the DOJ, probably. Bio CEO John Crowley is going to be on this commission. I've heard actually that he's going to lead it, and I've heard some of the other members who are going to be on it who are coming from the biopharma industry and from academia. There are a lot of recommendations and things that that this commission could make that would make an enormous difference if in fact they're implemented, and if in fact it comes to be, because these things have a way of changing between there's maybe a slip between the
and let's acknowledge
and their lips.
Vivek Ramaswamy is already, not going to be part of the Department of Government Efficiency. And we know the one thing we know about, Trump administrations is what we know from last time. Last time there was a lot of turnover. So I think you're right about the opportunities, but also a pinch of salt on what may actually end up happening among all these ideas.
I want to jump in. There's one other thing that I didn't mention that's extraordinarily important about FDA, which is that the negotiations for reauthorizing medical product user fees are supposed to happen later this year. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has expressed opposition to user fees. Some of the other people who are around President Trump have also expressed opposition to user fees. If user fees just go away and aren't replaced by anything else, it will be a catastrophic blow to FDA's ability to review drugs. But again, there's a big opportunity here. There's an opportunity to recast user fees, to kind of reimagine them in ways where industry will still be making large financial contributions to FDA, but it will be more clear that there's more clear to the public anyway, that there's an arm's length relationship between industry and FDA, and there may be ways to leverage this process to try to create more streamlining, more efficiency at FDA. There certainly is, ample opportunity for doing those kinds of things.
Right. And I think that, I mean, we should acknowledge that is important. There were certainly cases even not that long ago where there were accusations of too much coziness between industry and drugs that ended up getting approved. And regardless of whether that's true or not, there's certainly a perception, right, that that's true. I want to come to an issue that still within the realm of FDA that has a lot of people concerned. It is great that there's an opportunity. I think you've said yourself that no one would create FDA today with those divisions that it has. It doesn't necessarily make sense. There's certainly an understanding that the opportunity to fix things is there, and this might be a right moment. At the same time, drug developers and investors are particularly worried that, in particular, with the potential exodus of talent that you've talked about, what that means in the near term, and who knows how long the near term lasts, is that as there'll be a slowdown in drug approvals. If people leave until you hire new ones, if you hire new ones, there's fewer people to meet with sponsors and drug developers, and there'll be a slowdown. And that is bad for companies, bad for patients, bad for investors. I should have put that in another order. Bad for patients and everybody else. So
Yeah.
how do you think about that? Is that something that is a real concern?
Well, it's a concern. It's a possibility, but we certainly don't know whether it's going to happen or not. I think
what people say is there's already not enough people at FDA.
Well, they're meeting their PDUFA goals consistently, so I don't think that you can argue that a lack of reviewers is hampering FDA's ability to comply with its basic commitments under PDUFA and other requirements for drug reviews. I think it remains to be seen whether there are changes to FDA that lead to an exodus of staff that actually impede its ability to review drugs on time. Former Commissioner Scott Gottlieb warned at the CIRSE meeting in San Francisco that a heavy-handed approach to the back to work order directive would, for example, create so much of an exodus that it could threaten the ability of FDA to meet PDUFA goals. It's all hypothetical. We really don't know what's going to happen. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on who's the HHS secretary. A lot of it's going to depend on what Marty McCary, if he's confirmed as FDA commissioner, and I believe he will be, what his priorities are, how he approaches the job, and whether he has the interest and the political talent to kind of insulate FDA and its staff from the overall antagonism to civil servants and to regulation that is likely to be a feature of the Trump White House.
Steve, this is a great place to take a short break. We'll come back in a couple of minutes, and I have a whole bunch of questions even beyond FDA for you.
The BioCentury Show is supported by the BioCentury Conference Series. For 3 decades, BioCentury has helped biopharma executives and investors make business-critical decisions and build larger networks with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our goals are simple: gather the right people in the room to partner, network, and debate critical issues facing the biotech industry. BioCentury's upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal-making and investment. We hope to see you on the road at an upcoming BioCentury event. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information and to register.
We are back at the BioCentury Show, where I have my colleague, Washington editor Steve Usdin, an expert on FDA regulation, in fact, global drug regulation and policy. Steve, staying within the government conversation, but a little bit away from FDA for a moment, I want to ask you about the FTC. A lot of people have looked at this and said, Lena Khan is no longer going to be at FTC. So great, we're going to have loads of M&A now. It's plain sailing. Can you just tell us if that's how you see it and what you know about what might be happening at FTC?
So I think that, yes, Lena Khan is going to leave. It's unusual. She hasn't left yet, but she's going to be leaving soon. We're going to see a change at FTC. Lena Khan pursued novel theories of antitrust, theories that she believed allowed and required the FTC to scrutinize activities that are really typical for the biopharma ecosystem, things like acquisitions of small firms by big pharma and things like that. That I think is going to change. We're going to go back to a much more conventional approach to antitrust regulation. But I don't think that that means that there isn't going to be any regulation of antitrust. I think that the kinds of things that would have been scrutinized and perhaps blocked or modified under past administrations, Democratic and Republican, are still going to be scrutinized and blocked. One of the things that's interesting that we don't know how it's going to play out is what role Vice President J.D. Vance is going to play in the new administration. We haven't heard a great deal from him since the election. During the campaign, he actually expressed sympathy for the activities of Lena Khan, and he's certainly pushing what he considers to be a pro-competition agenda. So again, the FTC is not going to be toothless. They're not just going to sit back and do nothing, but they're not going to take the kind of aggressive and novel interpretations of antitrust law that they had under the Biden administration.
Well, thanks. I'm going to stay in the business world for a moment, and I want to talk about China, right? So the Biosecure Act, obviously, the Biosecure did not get included in last year's legislation. The issue of China has obviously not gone away. So I want to ask you where you think this is headed under the Trump administration. And one question that I'm channeling that I hear a lot is whether this is, we have this NewCo model, right? Something that is called the NewCo model, where people in the West have licensed IP from China companies who can't necessarily access capital there because of their rather dismal capital markets. And so they've had investors from the West take China IP to create new companies here. And a lot of people are concerned about whether that even might be under threat. So tell us a little bit about where you think the China conversation related to biotech is headed.
Well, first off, I would say that this is one of the few areas where there's bipartisan agreement. It's not really a Trump thing. Democrats and Republicans are united, for better or for worse, in their belief that the United States is over-reliant on China, that we need to have greater supply chain resiliency, and that there should be a decoupling of the U.S. and the Chinese economies more broadly, including in biotech and in other strategic sectors. So I think we're going to still see an emphasis and a push toward that. It's really unclear how that's going to play out, how it's going to play out in Congress, how it's going to play out in the administration. You have to remember in Congress, Republican majorities are razor thin, especially in the House. And it's going to be very difficult to get any kind of legislation through. This is an area where it's possible to see bipartisan support, but we don't really know whether it's going to be a priority. We don't know what's going to happen there. Does it get to the level where U.S. companies licensing Chinese IP are put at risk? I doubt it. Anything's possible. I think we're more likely to see things like more export controls on equipment, biotech manufacturing equipment, like the Biden administration imposed in its last days. I think we're likely to see an effort to revive something like Biosecure, possibly not having some of the elements of it that raised a lot of objections from Republicans and Democrats alike. I could imagine that, for example, it wouldn't name specific companies, but instead would set up a process for a federal agency to determine whether specific companies in China, their operations in the United States, or at U.S. Companies contracting with them in China, pose risks to the United States, national security risks. We'll see, but I can envision something like that happening.
So, there was obviously a lot of focus on biomanufacturing. Wuxi came under a lot of pressure, and people have been looking for alternative sources of contract research work. We know that initially the biopharma, you and I, we headed a survey that identified that 90% at the time of biotechs thought that this would really interrupt their processes and their programs. Do you think that the pressure on companies, Wuxi and other companies who are doing such contract researches from China is going to continue? How do you think people can prepare? Is there still a pressure to find Western or even domestic manufacturing and contract alternatives?
Well, so two things. Okay, one is that every boardroom, every pharma boardroom, and probably most big biotech boardrooms has got to be thinking about diversifying their supply chains, and that's going to include considering and reconsidering relationships with Chinese companies. I doubt that it's going to cause companies right now to sever their ties to Chinese companies if those ties are in their financial interest. But I think they're probably going to take steps to diversify.
All right, Steve, let us stay in a still murky area, but come back domestically, at least for now, and talk about CMS and also the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. What is going to stay and go with the IRA? Well, is I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's going to go, and I'm going to get my 9 to 13 and all of that. Walk us through what you expect to see on that front.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to be kind of to hedge what I'm saying on this, like everything else, because I can't pretend to really know. I think anybody that tells you that they really know either has an extraordinarily good crystal ball, or they're not telling the truth. Look, it's quite likely, I think, that we're going to see changes to the IRA's Medicare drug negotiation program. I think that Congress is likely to change the single orphan exemption. It's probably going to make that broader.
Let's just talk about why that, what would be the drivers. I think that's what I wanted to get at. I think we all know that you can't necessarily predict. Your crystal ball's good. It's really good, but not maybe that good. But what are the drivers? Like, why do you think, who will be the forces pushing for the orphan, exemption?
Patients,
so
right? Or patients, if you're the orphan disease community is well organized. They have a caucus in Congress with members from both parties, and orphan drug patients are extraordinarily upset by the idea that the government inadvertently created a disincentive for companies to develop more than one orphan indication for a drug. That's really well, frankly, for many people, it's terrifying. If they think that they could have gotten an effective therapy, and that because companies can only get an IRA price negotiation exemption for a single indication, the companies aren't going to pursue their indication. That's a very scary thing.
What we saw happening, right, was that a company might have data to support an orphan drug approval, but they didn't want that to be their first approval, so that they would hold that drug application, let's say, for the larger indication where they might be testing it. Is that right?
That's a separate issue. That's related to the pill penalty.
That's okay, right.
But anyway,
that's
so I think
the pill penalty being the 9 years.
13.
Right,
so I think on the orphan drug exemption, I think we're going to see an expansion of that. There's a good chance we'll see an expansion of it. Industry is trying to get Congress to completely eliminate the restrictions on it, and basically say as long as you only have orphan indications, you can have as many as you want, and your drug won't be subject to Medicare drug price negotiation. My guess is that that's an opening gambit for a negotiation that's going to end up being somewhat less generous than that. But then the second
So
issue,
you could have a drug and it could be for as many orphan indications as you want, and it won't be subject to price negotiation. That would be the goal.
that's industry's goal. I don't think at the end of the day, I don't think it'll be as generous as that. But I do think that there'll be an expansion. But then you have the much bigger issue, okay, of the so-called the pill penalty, the fact that small drugs that are approved under NDAs are subject to price negotiation 9 years after launch, and biologics drugs that are regulated under BLAs are subject to negotiation 13 years after launch. Fixing that is going to be much more difficult, okay? There's two reasons why it's going to be more difficult. First, it's going to require a consensus among the industry of how to change it, because of course, their easy answers to say, oh, it's easy, just change the 9 to 13, make everything 13. I don't think that that's politically feasible. So,
and why not?
Because it would be extraordinarily expensive. It would cost the government a great deal of money.
Right.
It would cost a great deal of money, and it would be seen as a giveaway to industry. I don't think it's going to happen. So then you have to say, okay, so if the 13 is going to have to back down, maybe to 12, maybe to 11, companies that have portfolios that are heavily weighted toward biologics are not going to be enthusiastic about that, right?
And in that scenario, just to be clear, it would be small molecules and biologics all getting the same level of exemption at, say, 11 or 12 years. Sorry,
that's
exemption.
That's one of the ideas that's been floated around Washington quite a bit. So first you'd have to come up with a kind of an agreement among the companies as to what would be acceptable there, and then there's still going to be a cost to it, all right, and then a cost to the taxpayers, and so then the industry is going to be expected to make that cost up. It's not going to be a giveaway again to the biopharmaceutical industry. So there would have to be an agreement about where you would get that money from. That's very difficult. And then,
but wait, I just want to make one point about that, Steve, because I take your point about industry obviously needing to find the money, let's say, to make up the difference. But I think one of the things that industry has been correctly saying is that by having this difference between them, you have this perverse incentive. So and when I say perverse incentive, what I mean is that you have companies that are pursuing one avenue rather than another, for example, not going for a small molecule, which is the most patient-friendly form of therapy. And they're doing that in order to go for the larger molecule. And that is not based on the science, but based on the revenues that they're going to get. And so industry itself has been saying, help us out here. You've got to make it, the same for both of them because we've got the wrong incentives.
Yeah, the same, or at least you've got to you've got to eliminate the disincentive for developing small molecules, which, as you say, they're better for patients. They're also, of course, much better for society and from an economic standpoint, because small molecule drugs are very certain to go generic and prices are going to go right down to the floor, whereas biologics, 50% of them never get a biosimilar competitor, and those that do get biosimilar competitors, the pricing doesn't go down that much, and also the added cost of administering biologics compared to.
So might it go in the other direction, be more favorable for small molecules and less favorable for biologics?
Well, there's some companies I'm sure that would love to see that. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that making any of these kind of changes is going to be difficult again, because it's going to have to be done through the budget reconciliation process. And I don't want to get too detailed about this, but basically that's a budget process that requires a majority of members of Congress to vote for it. The Republicans, as I mentioned earlier, have a very narrow majorities, especially in the House. So they have to, anything that is in a reconciliation bill has to have near unanimous support for Republicans.
You recently interviewed Representative Jake Alkenschloss, and he certainly is a big thinker on this front. Is it a given that no Democrats would vote to change this law?
I think it's a given that no Democrats are going to vote for a reconciliation bill. There isn't much prospect of a standalone bill that would change the IRA, and so the only way that it's likely to happen is through a reconciliation bill. I don't think that Republicans are counting on getting a single Democratic vote for a reconciliation bill, just as the reconciliation bill that created the IRA in the first place didn't get a single Republican vote.
Well, Steve, we are almost out of time. We are actually out of time, but I'm going to still stay with you for a couple minutes longer. I just want to ask whether there are other things that, beyond what we've talked about, that people need to be thinking about that really could impact our sector.
So I think there's a lot, but the way I see it, the way I see it, that there's like 5 or 6 pillars of the industry, and they all rely on an effective relationship between the government and the private sector and academia. Okay, so one of the important ones has been very generous support in the United States for basic research, mostly at NIH. I think that the future of NIH, the future of that pillar, is in doubt. We don't know what the likely next NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya, what he's going to do, and we don't know what Congress is going to do with NIH budgets. In the first Trump administration, the White House requested deep cuts to NIH funding. Congress was not in the mood to grant those cuts, and it either level set or even increased NIH funding during the Trump administration. It's not at all clear to me that we would see a similar situation in the Trump administration, in the second Trump administration. I think there's far less unanimity about the need to be generous in supporting NIH than there was in the past. There's a great deal of energy toward changing NIH, toward making it more subject to political control. So I think that's something that's going to be a really serious issue. Another one that I would bring up is immigration, and a lot of people would say, "Well, immigration, what does that got to do with biopharma?" And what I would say is, look around any biopharma company.
I'm not sure many people would question that. I mean, anybody in a biotech company has whatever % of people who are not from the US, and that's a lot.
So if you look around and you say, well, how many of the people who are in biopharma companies were not born in the United States? It's a lot. If you look around a second time and say, well, how many of the people who were in biopharma company, their parents weren't born in the United States? That's a lot more. The way that I look at it is that talent is evenly distributed across the face of the globe. The United States has prospered in many areas because we've attracted the best and the brightest from around the globe. If you're a scientist and you want to make a difference in drug development, in basic biology, and molecular biology, many of these fields, for generations now, the best thing that you could do is make your way to the United States, right? If that's changed, if the United States is no longer a magnet for talent from around the world, in the long term, that's going to be devastating for the United States' ability to be competitive in biomedicine and in other fields.
I agree, and you and I will obviously discuss that a lot more on screen and off screen. This has been a pleasure, Steve, and we're going to do this again sometime.
Great.
The BioCentury show is supported by the BioCentury Conference Series. Join BioCentury on the road to network, partner, and debate with peers across the biopharma innovation ecosystem. Our upcoming events span the globe and feature topics from translation to company building to deal-making and investment. Visit biocenturyontheroad.com for more information.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.